Top 6 actors Lee Van Cleef hated the most. Lee Van Cleef was born Clarence Leroy Van Cleef, Jr.B., on January 9, 1925 in Somerville, New Jersey. He was the son of a working family with Dutch background. His early life gave little hint of the movie legacy. He would one day leave behind. After finishing high school, he served bravely in the US Navy during World War II, taking part in Mission Sabard, a minesweeper in the Pacific area. His military service taught him a disciplined way that later showed up powerfully on the screen. After the war, Van Cleef came home and worked different regular jobs, including as a bookkeeper and painter. However, his path took a big turn when he was cast in a local play where his intense stage presence caught the attention of Hollywood scouts. His screen debut came in 1952 with High Noon, where he played a silent bad gunslinger. Though it was a small role with no talking, his striking looks left a lasting impression. With sharp cheekbones, a hawk-like nose, and an intense stare, Van Cleef didn't look like the regular Hollywood star. But that uniqueness became his greatest strength. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, he was often cast as a supporting bad guy in countless westerns and crime dramas. His characters were usually henchmen, outlaws, or icy killers. And while he rarely had top billing during this time, his performances were always memorable. Films like Kansas City Confidential, 1952, The Big Combo, 1955, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962, showed his ability to command the screen even with little talking. Unfortunately, a near-deadly car accident in 1958 left him with a damaged knee, and for a time, it seemed his acting career might be over. However, the 1960s brought a miraculous second act to Van Cleef's career, one that would make him a movie legend. Italian director Sergio Leone cast him in the now famous spaghetti western for a few dollars more, 1965, opposite Clint Eastwood. Van Cleef played Colonel Douglas Mortimer, a steely, dignified bounty hunter seeking revenge. His performance stunned audiences and critics alike, revealing a charisma and complexity that had gone largely untapped in his earlier roles. This marked the beginning of his rise as a leading man, a rarity for actors who had long been stuck in bad guy roles. He reprised his on-screen chemistry with Eastwood in The Good, The Bad, and Fugly, 1966, where he portrayed Angel Eyes, the cold-hearted, calculating bad character in Leone's famous trio. The film was a massive success and secured Van Cleef's international stardom. Unlike many actors who might have faded with the fitting popularity of westerns, Van Cleef embraced the spaghetti western stylefully, going on to star in a string of European westerns throughout the 1960s and 1970s. These included Sabata 1969, Death Rides a Horse 1967, The Big Gundown 1966, and Day of Anger 1967. Each role further cemented his reputation as a master of quiet intensity and moral confusion. His on-screen persona was defined by quiet authority. He spoke softly but carried an ever-present air of danger. Unlike other Western stars who relied on loud heroism, Van Cleef's characters were often thoughtful, calculating, and driven by personal codes of justice. Even if they walked morally gray paths, he became a symbol of the anti-hero type that came to define the modern Western. Viewers respected him not just for his performances but for the way he seemed to inhabit his roles with realness shaped by personal hardship and experience. In the 1980s, Van Cleef expanded his range with roles in television and action-adventure films. He starred in the cult classic Escape from New York, 1981, as the controlling police commissioner Hawk, and took on the lead role in the series The Master, 1984, where he played a retired ninja master. Though these later projects had varying degrees of success, they illustrated his ability to evolve with changing trends in the entertainment industry. Lee Van Cleef's personal life was marked by a series of important relations, each of which happened during different chapters of his journey through Hollywood and beyond. His first marriage was to Patsy Ruth Call in 1943, a union that began during the troubled years of World War II. At the time, Van Cleef was still early in his acting career, having recently moved from his service in the United States Navy into the world of stage and film. Patsy Ruth, who became his loyal companion during these growing years, stood by him as he began to carve out a name for himself in the industry. Together, they raised a family, welcoming 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son into their lives. Their responsibilities of fatherhood and the demands of a growing acting career placed big pressure on Van Cleef, who often found himself torn between the tough work of film sets and the needs of his young family. Despite their shared history and the years they spent together, the couple eventually found their relationship strained by the difficulties that can arise from life in the public eye. In 1958, after 15 years of marriage, Lee and Patsy divorced, marking the end of his first and longest-lasting marriage relationship. 2 years later, in 1960, Van Cleef remarried, this time to Joan Marjorie Edrin. Joan entered his life at a time when his acting career was in a state of change. He had experienced both highs and lows in Hollywood and was still recovering from a serious car accident in the late 1950s that nearly ruined his future in film. Joan provided a sense of emotional support and companionship as he worked to regain his footing in the industry. This marriage lasted for 14 years and spanned a critical period during which Van Cleef experienced a major career comeback, particularly in Europe, where he found international fame starring in famous spaghetti westerns such as For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Joan remained by his side as achieved a level of stardom he had never previously known. Yet, like his first marriage, this relationship too would eventually end in divorce in 1974. The reasons behind their separation remain largely private, but it is likely that the ongoing pressures of fame, frequent travel, and the intensity of life in the entertainment industry played a role. In 1976, Lee Van Cleef entered into his third and final marriage, this time to Barbara Havalone. By this point, Van Cleef had firmly established himself as a global star, particularly beloved in Europe for his commanding on-screen presence and unique features that made him a memorable and often scary figure in Western cinema. Barbara became notably his spouse, but also a constant and stabilizing presence during the latter years of his life and career. She stood by him during his final years of film work and supported him through various health challenges, including chronicis stemming from his earlier car accident and lifelong smoking habit. Their marriage endured until his death in 1989, making Barbara the widow of a man whose legacy continues to live on through his legendary performances. Her loyalty and devotion were evident in her continued efforts to honor his memory following his passing, and she is often remembered fondly by fans as the woman who was there for Van Cleef when the final curtain fell on a remarkable life and career. Lee Van Cleef, the steely gunslinger with the unmistakable presence, earned his reputation as one of Hollywood's most unforgettable tough guys, while he worked with some of the greatest stars in cinema. Not all of his collaborations were friendly. Known for his blunt nature and no-nonsense professionalism, Van Cleef didn't suffer fools or egos lightly. Behind the scenes, he reportedly clashed with several fellow actors due to personality conflicts, artistic disagreement, or pure dislike. Here, six actors Lee Van Cleef is said to have hated the most. Lee Van Cleef's relationship with John Wayne was complicated to say the least. On the surface, both were towering icons of the Western genre, but underneath that movie common ground lay deep differences in personality, politics, and professional respect. While Wayne represented the all-American, flag-waving, studio-backed cowboy ideal, Van Cleef carved out his image through grittier European-made spaghetti westerns that reveled in moral confusion and movie realism. Van Cleef was a craftsman, a man who built his career from the bottom up, starting with uncredited roles and bit parts as villains. He resented how Wayne, backed by powerhouses like John Ford, dominated genre with a sense of entitlement, according to crew members on overlapping studio lots. Van Cleef found Wayne pompous and dismissive, especially when Duke reportedly referred to European westerns as cheap cowboy flicks. Van Cleef, whose fame exploded in Sergio Leone's For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, saw that as a personal insult. Though they never co-starred, there were rumors that Van Cleef turned down a minor role in a John Wayne film simply because he didn't want to be second fiddle to a studio puppet. In private, he referred to Wayne as Hollywood's mascot, and avoided any interaction with him on red carpets or press tours. The rivalry, though never overtly publicized, was well known among Western insiders. 2. Charles Bronson. The Battle of the Brooding Alphas. Charles Bronson and Lee Van Cleef were often considered cut from a similar cloth, rugged, quiet, and intense screen presences who could carry a film with a single scowl. But Van Cleef reportedly bristled at the constant comparisons and harbored an underlying dislike toward Bronson, particularly in the 1970s when both were at the height of their European fame. The tipping point may have come when Bronson secured the lead role in Once Upon a Time in the West, a Sergio Leone pick that Van Cleef had expressed interest in. While Leone had previously favored Van Cleef, he chose Bronson instead for steely-eyed. Van Cleef allegedly took this as a professional betrayal and questioned Leone's loyalty. In later interviews, Van Cleef subtly jabbed at Bronson's wooden acting and once quipped that a block-off grenade could show more emotion. On set, when the two briefly crossed paths during overlapping productions in Spain, tension was said to be so thick that producers deliberately staggered their shooting schedules. Despite both actors being quiet professionals, Van Cleef considered Bronson's meteoric rise an example of Hollywood rewarding style over substance, which Van Cleef trained in theater and method acting found insulting. 3. Clint Eastwood from Student Autonomy. Perhaps the most surprising Ginklian on this list is Clint Eastwood, the man who helped elevate Van Cleef to international fame. Their work together in For a Few Dollars Marine The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly Waste legendary. But behind the scenes, their relationship was far more troubled than it appeared on screen. Initially, Van Cleef admired Eastwood's calm demeanor and ambition. But as Eastwood's fame exploded in the 1970s, Van Cleef felt discarded. He believed Eastwood had used their collaborations as a stepping stone and then turned his back on the actors and directors who had helped him rise. Eastwood's transition from actor to director further widened the gap, especially when he didn't cast Van Cleef in later westerns like High Plains Drifter or Pale Rider, roles Van Cleef thought were tailor-made for him. Rumor suggests that Van Cleef even reached Udo Eastwood's production company for potential collaborations in the early 80s but was politely ignored. In interviews, Van Cleef was diplomatic but firm. Clint's gone Hollywood. He once said traded in dust and grit for cameras and cocktails. Though Eastwood never responded publicly, industry insiders confirmed the coldness between the two legends was real. 4. Telly Savalas, the eccentric showman versus the quiet gunslinger Telly Savalas. Best known for his role as Kojak, crossed paths with Van Cleef during the 1970s when both were frequent presences in European crime and action films. Savalas, with his flamboyant personality and ego-driven approach to fame, reportedly rubbed Van Cleef the wrong way. Van Cleef was a no-nonsense professional who valued discipline and subtlety, whereas Savalas enjoyed the limelight, often dominating sets with his charisma and unpredictable bravura. During a brief overlapping product in Italy, allegedly on adjacent sets, Van Cleef was said to have walked off after hearing Savalas mock his acting style as stone-faced squinting. Their personalities were simply oil and water. Savalas was the loud, cigar-chomping scene stealer, while Van Cleef embodied a quiet, controlled menace. Rumors persisted that Van Cleef refused any future offers that would pair them together, citing creative incompatibility, his diplomatic way of saying, "I can't stand that guy." 5. Yul Brynner, Thigo with a cowboy hat. Yul Brynner, famous for the Magnificent Seven, was another figure Van Cleef held in contempt. While both actors had roots in westerns, Van Cleef viewed Brynner as too theatrical and too concerned with his carefully curated image. Their differences were aesthetic and philosophical. Brynner was smooth, mannered, and often aloof, while Van Cleef was raw, grounded, and intense. Their paths crossed at several European film festivals and award shows. And thought cordial in public, Van Cleef reportedly found Brynner arrogant and dismissive. A famous behind-the-scenes story involves Brynner allegedly turning down a co-starring role with Van Cleef because he didn't want to share the screen with a second-string gunslinger. Van Cleef never forgave that comment and often cited Brynner as an example of Hollywood elitism. When asked in a European interview in 1985 about actor she respected, Van Cleef notably omitted Brynner from a list that included Henry Fonda, Franco Nero, and even Charles Bronson. That omission spoke volumes. 6. James Coburn. A clash of cool. James Coburn, known for his smooth charisma and effortlessly cool demeanor, may seem like an unlikely target of Van Cleef's ire. However, the friction reported stemmed from Coburn's casual attitude toward acting and his tendency to overshadow others with laid-back charm. Van Cleef, who had to fight tooth and nail for recognition in Hollywood, felt that Coburn had sauntered into stardom, coasting on charm rather than craft. A particularly sour incident allegedly occurred when both actors were considered for the same lead role in European Western. The part went to Coburn, prompting Van Cleef to accuse the producers of choosing swagger over substance. The bitterness grew when Van Cleef heard Coburn joke in an interview that Leelwiz looks like someone stole his shirts. Although the comment was like eliminate in jest, Van Cleef, ever the serious, prideful craftsman, took it as an insult. While they were never overtly hostile in public, Van Cleef reportedly warned younger actors not to model yourself after Coburn unless you want to sleepwalk through your career, though Lee Van Cleef was a perfect professional on set. His strong sense of artistic integrity and dislike for arrogance, favoritism, and studio politics led him to harbor grudges against some of the biggest names in Hollywood, whether it was ideological difference with John Wayne, personal betrayal from Clint Eastwood, or personality clashes with Savalas and Brenner. Van Cleef's list of Hollywood FOs reflects not pettiness, but a deep commitment to the craft and a refusal to play the fame game. In the dusty corners of movie history, these rivalries add yet another layer to the mystique of the man who was above all the bad, and proudly so, despite suffering from heart disease from the 1970s and having a pacemaker installed in the 1980s. Van Cleef continued to work in films until his death on December 16, 1989. He collapsed from a heart attack in Hisham in Oxnard, California. Throat cancer was listed as a secondary cause of